The mist hung heavy over the strange silver plains of Viralia, a world hidden beyond the maps of any known chart. The planet glowed softly under a lavender sky, where twin moons shimmered like pearls. Commander Ethan Vale stepped out of his landing craft and looked around with calm curiosity. The silence of the alien land pressed against him, thick and alive. He was humanity's first envoy to this distant world. And though he had faced unknown species before, something about Viralia felt different. There was no hostility in the air, only sadness. He took a few careful steps forward, his boots leaving faint marks on the smooth, metallic soil. In the distance, a tall figure stood waiting, slender, draped in flowing garments that caught the faint breeze. Her skin shimmered with pale violet light, and her eyes reflected the color of the moons. She moved with grace, yet there was hesitation in every step. When Ethan reached her, she lowered her head slightly, avoiding his gaze. "I am Kalira," she said softly, her voice a mix of music and sorrow. "You come from the blue world called Earth?" Ethan nodded. "I do. I came here to learn, not to judge." She looked at him then, really looked, and something flickered in her expression. It wasn't anger or fear, it was pain. She seemed to struggle with words before finally whispering something that surprised him completely. "Why am I so ugly?" Ethan blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. Of all the questions he had prepared for about human intentions, about trade or peace, he had not expected that. There was a trembling honesty in her voice, a plea that carried more weight than any political concern. He didn't answer at once. The translator chip confirmed the meaning clearly. She had asked if she was ugly. Ethan took a slow breath and looked at her again. Her face was unlike any human's, sharp, luminous, and marked by strange silver lines that pulsed faintly beneath her skin. Her eyes were large and deep, not frightening but ancient. She was different, yes, but ugly? No. That word felt wrong here in this silent place. Kalira turned her face away, mist gathering around her. "The last species that came here told us that we were broken," she said quietly. "They said our forms were unpleasant, that no one beyond Viralia could look upon us without pity." Ethan felt something twist inside him. He had seen this before, not in form but in spirit. Across the galaxy, he had met races who carried scars left by cruelty. Some scars were physical, others invisible. Words could wound, and sometimes those wounds never healed. "You believe them?" Ethan asked gently. Her eyes flicked toward him, unsure. "How can I not? They were travelers from beyond. They said their people were beautiful. They said we were not." Ethan looked at her hands folded tightly before her. He could see how deeply that belief had settled within her, not as a single moment of pain, but as a lifetime of silence. The air around them shimmered as if holding its breath. "Beauty," he said slowly, "is not one thing. It changes from world to world. On Earth we have many faces, many forms. None are the same, and each carries its own story. You have your own too." She looked unconvinced, almost afraid to believe him. "Then why do you look at me with sadness?" "Because I can see how much those words hurt you," he replied softly. "Not because of what you look like." For the first time, Kalira seemed unsure how to respond. She turned her gaze toward the horizon, where pale light rippled across the sky. "We once built mirrors," she whispered. "Every home had one. Then one day our leaders ordered them destroyed. They said reflection was a curse." Ethan's heart sank. A whole race that feared its own image. A people who had been taught to despise themselves. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she was not ugly, that her voice carried strength. But he sensed this was not the moment for quick comfort. "I didn't come here to bring old lies," he said. "Maybe together we can learn what truth really looks like." Kalira's gaze softened slightly, curiosity stirring behind the sorrow. She studied him in silence, as if weighing whether she could trust this stranger from the stars. Then she gave a small nod. "You are different from the others," she murmured. "They came to speak but not to listen." "I'll listen," Ethan said. "Show me your world." And so she led him through the mist. The city that appeared beyond the silver plains was built from crystal towers and glowing arches, light pulsing through every surface. It was beautiful in its own way, a world shaped by hands that saw harmony where others saw flaw. Yet as they passed, Ethan noticed something haunting. Every Virelian lowered their eyes. None met his gaze. Not one smile appeared. Kalira walked silently beside him, her steps light but heavy with meaning. He could feel the question still hanging in the air. Why am I so ugly? Echoing through every glance, every bowed head. And he knew then that his mission was no longer about alliances or treaties. It was about helping a world see itself again. The next day, Ethan followed Kalira through the glowing streets of Virelia. The city seemed alive. Buildings pulsed with gentle light and roads shimmered like flowing glass. Yet the people who lived among such beauty walked as if carrying invisible chains. No laughter echoed. No voices rose in joy. The silence was thick, like a wound that refused to heal. Kalira guided Ethan toward a tall structure in the heart of the city. Its shape curved like a blossom opening to the sky. She told him it was called the Hall of Echoes, a place where the memories of their ancestors were stored. As they entered, soft light surrounded them. Walls shimmered with faint images, faces of those long gone, their eyes full of sadness. "This is where we remember," Kalira said, her voice low. "Every face, every name, every sorrow. But no one comes here anymore." Ethan looked at the images and saw what she meant. There were no smiles. Each expression was blank, almost ashamed. He could sense that generations of Virelians had lived believing they were less than others, that their faces, their forms, their entire being were something to hide. He turned to Kalira. "Who told you these things? That you were broken?" She hesitated, then lifted her hand toward one of the glowing walls. The image shifted, showing tall figures in smooth silver armor, aliens with bright, perfect features. "They called themselves the Sol Thar," she whispered. "Long ago they came in shining ships. They gave us tools, medicine, and language, for they also gave us their judgment." Ethan studied the image. The Solthar looked proud, almost flawless, and too symmetrical, too polished. They must have believed themselves the model of beauty and expected others to follow their standard. "They said we were in error," Kalira continued. "They told us our forms were twisted, that if we ever wanted peace, we must hide our faces. Our ancestors believed them. They broke the mirrors. They changed our ways. We began to cover ourselves with veils and shadows." Her voice trembled as she spoke. Ethan could tell she was repeating words told to her since childhood. A lie, spoken long enough, had become a truth in her people's hearts. He walked closer to one of the glowing panels and reached out, brushing his fingers against the faint light. "And you believed them because they came from the stars," he said quietly. "You thought their word meant truth." Kalira nodded. "They were powerful. We were peaceful. We could not fight their ideas, only live with them." Ethan turned toward her, his eyes steady. "They gave you gifts, but they took something far greater. They took how you see yourselves." Kalira lowered her head. "Now even our children do not ask who we were before them. They think this shame is our nature." Ethan walked beside her in silence for a while. He remembered Earth's history, times when humans had judged each other for skin, shape, or belief. They too had carried the scars of false standards. It was strange how across light years pain could take the same form. As they left the hall, the streets brightened with the rising light of the twin moons. Kalira led Ethan to a small market where Virelians exchanged crystals and glowing plants. The scene was gentle, yet no one lifted their gaze when he passed. A child tugged at his mother's hand, pointing at Ethan curiously, but she quickly pulled the child away, whispering something. Kalira noticed his expression. "They do not mean harm," she said softly. "They only fear how you see them." Ethan looked around. "Do they think all humans judge beauty this way?" "They do not know," she replied. "They think your kind must see us as the Solthar did, imperfect, unpleasant. They believe every being beyond our world must feel the same." Ethan sighed. "They've lived so long under someone else's eyes that they forgot their own." Kalira's step slowed. "Do your people not do the same?" Her question caught him off guard. He thought about it, about the times when humans themselves had measured worth by shallow images. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but many of us have learned that beauty is not a single shape. It's what shines through a person's heart." Kalira seemed to think deeply about his words. They reached a quiet garden at the city's edge where silver trees swayed under the moons. Soft lights drifted like living fireflies. She knelt beside a pool of still water and looked at her reflection. The image shimmered faintly as if afraid to stay. "When I was a child," she said, "I asked my mother why the stars never showed faces. She told me the stars had no reason to be ashamed, but we did." Her voice grew softer. "That answer never left me." Ethan crouched beside her. What if the stars don't hide because they don't need to be perfect? They just exist unshining as they are. Kalira's gaze lifted to the sky. The reflection of light danced in her eyes. For a long moment neither spoke. There was only the sound of wind and the faint hum of the city. In that silence, Ethan understood something important. He had come to Virelia as an envoy, but now he saw a deeper purpose. These people didn't need trade or treaties, they needed truth. They needed someone to remind them that beauty was not a gift from others but something already inside them. Kalira rose slowly, her expression uncertain but thoughtful. "You speak as if you see something we cannot." Ethan smiled gently. "Maybe I do, or maybe you've just forgotten how to look." For the first time, a flicker of warmth touched her face. Not quite a smile, but close. It was the first spark of light in a long, shadowed world. That night, the air over Virelia carried a quiet glow. The moons hung side by side, their light washing over the plains in silver waves. Ethan followed Kalira beyond the city, their footsteps silent on the soft, metallic soil. The stars above shimmered like distant eyes, and a faint mist rolled over the ground. She said nothing for a long time, only walked ahead, her robe trailing behind like a shadow that refused to fade. They came to a wide open space surrounded by curved crystal pillars. In the center was a lake so still it looked like glass. Tiny lights floated over its surface, shifting with every breath of wind. Kalira stopped at the edge, her reflection rippling beneath her feet. "This place is called the Mirror of Stars," she said softly. "Long ago, before the Solthar came, our people would gather here. They said the lake showed not the face we wore, but the light within us. Now no one visits anymore." Ethan looked at the water, the reflection of the sky mixed with Kalira's image, blending stars into her eyes. The sight was haunting, almost sacred. "It's beautiful," he said. She shook her head slowly. "It is cruel. Every time I look into it, I see what they told us we were, something unworthy." Her voice trembled, but she did not turn away. "When I was young, I came here often, hoping the stars would change me. They never did." Ethan knelt beside her and studied the reflection. The water showed her as she was, tall, graceful, her face lined with strange silver marks that pulsed faintly with life. There was strength in those lines, not flaw. But he could feel how deeply she had learned to hate what she saw. "What do you see now?" he asked quietly. She hesitated. "I see a shape others could not love, a reminder of how different we are. When I look at you, your face is balanced, calm, soft. Ours were never like that." Ethan's heart ached at her words. He had seen war, seen loss, but this quiet, lifelong pain I felt heavier than battle. He knew he could not erase her memories, but he could show her something else. "Where I come from," he said gently. "We tell stories about people who were different. Some had scars, some were born unlike others. They were not less. They were proof that beauty has many faces. My people learned that difference is not something to fear. It's something to protect." Kalira turned to him slowly. "You speak as though your kind has never judged." Ethan smiled faintly. "Oh, we have. Many times. We made the same mistakes. But some learned. Some looked beyond faces and saw hearts." The wind shifted, sending ripples across the lake. Kalira knelt down beside him. Her reflection danced across the water. She stared into it again, her voice breaking slightly. "When I see myself, I remember their words. Imperfect. Unworthy. It is as if their voices still live in the air." Ethan looked at her reflection, then at his own beside hers. "Then let mine live there too," he said quietly. "Let it say something different." She glanced at him, unsure. "What would your voice say?" "That I see someone brave enough to face herself," he replied. "Someone who carries pain but still stands. Someone who was told lies yet still seeks truth." Kalira blinked, startled by the warmth in his tone. The stars shimmered on the water like scattered tears. "No one ever said such words to me," she whispered. "Maybe no one dared," Ethan said. "But that doesn't mean they weren't true." The silence stretched between them, gentle and full. For the first time since he arrived, Ethan saw her shoulders ease. The tension that had bound her seemed to fade, even if only slightly. She reached her hand toward the surface of the lake. And when her fingers touched it, her reflection wavered. For a heartbeat, the stars blended with her face and she looked radiant. "On Earth," Ethan said softly, "we have a saying. You find beauty where you choose to see it. Maybe the Solthar could not see yours because they never tried. They wanted to see only themselves." Kalira's gaze stayed fixed on the water. They were light and perfect. We were shadows beside them. Ethan shook his head. You were never shadows. They were blind. Her breath caught, and for a moment she said nothing. The air felt still, as if the planet itself was listening. Then very quietly, Kalira whispered, "If your people had come first, would we have believed something different?" Ethan thought carefully. Maybe. But sometimes even truth needs time to be heard. She looked at him, eyes reflecting both moons. Then perhaps time has finally come. Ethan smiled gently. Perhaps it has. They sat by the mirror of stars until the first light of dawn began to touch the horizon. Kalira rose and turned toward the distant city. Her steps were light, but there was a change in her. Not a sudden transformation, but a spark of thought, a fragile hope beginning to breathe. As they walked back, Ethan glanced at the lake one last time. Their reflections were gone, but the stars remained steady, patient, waiting for a world to see them again. The next morning, Kalira led Ethan deeper into the city, away from the main streets and the glowing towers. The path was narrow and quiet, flanked by crystal walls that hummed faintly with energy. The mist curled between the pillars like gentle smoke, and the air carried a soft metallic scent. Kalira's eyes were fixed ahead, but Ethan noticed a tension in her shoulders that had not been there the day before. Finally, they reached a small courtyard surrounded by tall silver spires. The space was empty except for a single fountain in the center, its waters reflecting the twin moons even in the daylight. Kalira stopped and turned to him. Her expression was more serious than he had seen before. "Ethan," she said quietly, "I have asked myself the same question 1,000 times, and now I will ask you, truly." She swallowed and looked him directly in the eyes. "Am I ugly to you?" Ethan felt a weight in the air. He had prepared answers for diplomacy, for teaching, for comfort. But this question, so simple, so human, demanded honesty and care. He took a deep breath and met her gaze steadily. "You are not ugly," he said softly. "Not in the way the Solthar wanted you to believe. Not in any way that matters. You are strong, you are brave, and you are real. Your pain and your kindness are part of who you are. That is beauty." Kalira's eyes widened slightly, disbelief flashing across her face. She looked down at her hands, twisting them nervously. I've lived all my life thinking otherwise. That I am a mistake. That the world would never accept me." Her voice cracked, and for a moment she seemed on the edge of collapse. Ethan stepped closer and rested a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You were never a mistake," he said. "Your people may have been told lies, but that does not make them true. You carry your history, your courage, and your heart. That is far more important than appearances. And it is something no one can take from you." Tears welled in Kalira's eyes. She tried to look away, but her reflection shimmered in the fountain like a second image of herself, trembling and uncertain. Ethan knelt beside her and motioned toward the water. "Look at yourself," he said. "Really look. Not with the voice of the Solthar or the echoes of the past. Look with your own eyes. See what you have become, not what others told you to be." Kalira hesitated, then bent over the fountain. Her reflection was faint and rippled with the movement of her fingers. For a moment she could not see herself. Then slowly the shimmer cleared and she glimpsed a face that was familiar and yet foreign. It was the face of someone who had survived countless judgments, someone who had carried sadness and still moved forward. Her lips trembled and a single tear fell into the fountain, making small concentric circles in the water. Ethan watched quietly, giving her the space she needed. "Your tears are not shame," he said softly. "They are proof that you feel, that you have lived, that you are human, in the way that matters. Every being has worth no matter their shape or color, and so do you." Kalira's shoulders shook as she struggled to speak. No one has ever said anything like this to me." Her voice broke, and Ethan realized she had been waiting for this moment her entire life, even if she had not known it. "You are not alone anymore," he said. "I see you, and I will tell you the truth as long as I am here. You are worthy, Kalira, do not forget that." For a long while they stayed by the fountain. Kalira wiped her tears, her eyes bright with something new, hope, or perhaps understanding. The mist around them swirled, catching the light of the towers and the sun above, casting rainbow-like patterns across the ground. For the first time, she seemed to carry herself differently, not weighed down by shame, but lifting herself slowly, carefully. She finally spoke, her voice trembling but stronger than before. If my people could see what you see, if they could hear your words, perhaps they would begin to believe that they are not flawed. Ethan smiled gently. That is why I am here. Not to change your people by force or command, but to remind them of what they have forgotten. That beauty is not defined by another's eyes, but by what lies within. Kalira looked down at the fountain again, her reflection calm this time. Your answer. It makes me cry, she said quietly. But it is a good cry, one I have never had before. Ethan nodded. Tears can be cleansing, he said. They wash away what no longer serves us. Your people have carried this pain for centuries. Perhaps it is time to begin letting it go. Kalira straightened, the first faint smile touching her lips. Then maybe there is hope. Not just for me, but for all of us. The two of them remained in the courtyard until the light shifted, signaling the rising sun. The twin moons faded into the morning sky, leaving only the pale glow of Virelia's surface. Kalira finally turned back toward the city, her steps measured and steady. Ethan followed, knowing that today something had changed. It was not a sudden transformation, but a beginning, a fragile, delicate start. Kalira had asked the question that had haunted her life, and for the first time she had received an answer that held truth, compassion, and hope. It was a moment that could ripple through her world, if she allowed it, and Ethan understood as he walked beside her that sometimes the greatest victories were not battles fought with weapons, but battles fought with words, understanding, and the courage to see another being as they truly were. Over the following days, Ethan stayed close to Kalira, learning more about her world and the lives of its people. He observed them quietly, how they moved through streets of shimmering crystal, their heads lowered, eyes avoiding one another, voices barely rising above whispers. Even in a city of such beauty, sadness lingered in every corner, carried like an invisible weight. But with each passing moment, Ethan noticed something shifting in Kalira. Her steps grew steadier, her gaze less afraid, and sometimes a flicker of curiosity appeared in her expression. One morning, she led him to a square filled with small, hovering lights. The space was used for gatherings, though few came anymore. Kalira paused in the center, looking around at the empty courtyard. They have forgotten how to celebrate, she said softly. We once sang here, danced here, shared our stories. Now we hide ourselves. Ethan watched her, understanding that the pain of her people was not just personal, it was cultural, woven into the very fabric of their history. Perhaps they only need someone to remind them, he said gently. Someone to show that it is safe to be seen. Kalira hesitated, then slowly nodded. You speak of hope, but how do I begin? They will not believe me alone. Not alone, Ethan corrected. I am with you. And together, we can show them a different way. Over the next few hours, Kalira took Ethan through her people's neighborhoods. At first, the Virelians looked away, whispering among themselves. Some children peeked from behind crystal pillars, curious but cautious. As Kalira walked among them, she spoke softly, sharing her own story, of her fear, her shame, and the words Ethan had told her. At first, the words were met with silence, but curiosity grew. Faces lifted, eyes met hers, and whispers turned into questions. Ethan stayed back, letting her take the lead. He watched as Kalira told the people about the mirror of stars, about the courage it took to look at oneself and recognize value beyond appearances. You are not defined by what others say, she told them. Your worth is not measured by eyes that do not see you. For some, her words were difficult to hear. They had been taught their entire lives that they were less, that their forms were shameful. Yet as she spoke, a quiet stirring began to spread among them. Small gestures appeared, a hand reaching out, a head lifting, a tentative smile. Ethan could see the moment when old fear met the possibility of hope. By the afternoon, more people gathered. Kalira invited them to look into small pools of water placed in the square. As they gazed at their reflections, some hesitated, shielding their faces. But when she spoke again, her voice clear and calm, they began to linger, studying the reflections with curiosity instead of fear. Ethan could see the change in their posture, the softening of tension in their shoulders. One child, a small Virelian with pale lavender skin, stepped forward and painted a picture of Kalira and Ethan standing together beneath the moons. The painting was simple but full of light, and soon others began to add their own drawings, capturing the city, the stars, and the faces of people who had never dared to see themselves as worthy. Kalira looked at the artworks with wonder. "They are beginning to remember," she said softly. "The world they were taught to forget is not lost." Ethan nodded. "It is never lost, Kalira. It is waiting for someone to show them it still exists. You are that person." As evening fell, Kalira led Ethan to the city's highest point, where a terrace overlooked the glowing towers and winding streets. Lights shimmered across the city like stars fallen to the ground. Virelians moved through the streets with more confidence, some smiling, some speaking softly to one another. The air itself seemed lighter, as if a collective burden had begun to lift. Kalira turned to Ethan, her eyes reflecting both moons. "Your words," she said, "and your belief in me, they have begun to change my world." Ethan smiled. "You did the work. I only helped you see it. You gave your people permission to look at themselves with honesty and courage. That is what matters." For the first time, Kalira allowed herself to feel the weight of her own strength. The sadness that had followed her for so long was still there, but it no longer ruled her. A spark of pride touched her chest and her shoulders straightened. She looked out at her city, and in that moment, she saw it not as a place of shame, but as a place of beauty waiting to be remembered. Ethan stayed with her until night fell, the stars above reflecting in the city's towers. Together they watched as the first small celebrations began. Children laughing, lights floating in the air, music rising from hidden corners. Virelians, once hidden behind fear and doubt, were beginning to embrace who they truly were. Kalira's voice, steady and soft, carried over the square. "We are not broken. We are whole. We are seen." Ethan looked at her and felt a deep satisfaction. Humanity's gift was not technology, not weapons, not conquest. It was understanding, compassion, and the courage to help others see their own value. Kalira had begun to bring her people back to life, and he knew that what they had started here would ripple far beyond Virelia. For the first time in centuries, the city felt alive, not just with light, but with hope. And as the moons rose high over the plains, Ethan realized that he had witnessed something extraordinary, a world learning to see itself again, led by a woman who had once whispered in sorrow, but was now speaking with pride. Weeks passed, and the city of Virelia began to change. Where once silence had dominated, now faint laughter floated through the streets and soft conversations echoed off the crystal towers. Kalira moved among her people with new confidence, no longer hiding her face or her thoughts. Children ran ahead, calling to her with curiosity rather than fear. Adults lifted their heads, tentative smiles appearing as they began to trust what she had learned to believe about herself. Ethan followed quietly, observing the small but meaningful transformations. It was not sudden. Change never is, but it was real, and it spread like a tide creeping through the city. Kalira had become more than a guide or a leader. She had become a bridge between what her people feared and what they could now accept. One morning, the Council of Virelia, a group of elders who had long held power over the city, summoned Kalira and Ethan. They gathered in a vast hall of silver arches, the air shimmering with the hum of energy. The elders' faces were solemn, their eyes cautious. They had watched the changes in the city, some with suspicion, others with curiosity, but they had not yet spoken. Kalira stepped forward, her head high. "I bring a message of truth," she said. "For centuries our people have been told we are less than others, that our forms are flawed. We have hidden, bowed our heads, and lived in fear. But that is not who we are. We are whole. We are worthy, and now I ask that you see yourselves as you truly are." The elders exchanged glances. One of them, a tall Virelian with silver markings tracing his face, spoke slowly. "Your words are bold, Kalira, but they challenge the teachings of generations. How to do? We know this is truth and not wishful thinking." Ethan stepped forward, his tone calm but firm. "I am from another world. I have seen your people as they are, not as others said you should be. I have seen your strength, your courage, your ability to love and create. These are the measures of worth. Not a reflection in a mirror, not the judgment of outsiders. What Kalira says is not just hope. It is the truth I have witnessed." The hall fell silent. For a long moment the elders studied him as if seeing a new world through his eyes. Slowly, one by one, they began to nod. The air seemed to shift as centuries of unspoken fear met the reality of someone outside their traditions, recognizing their value. Kalira's voice softened. "Your people have hidden for too long. The Solthar taught us shame, but the truth has always been inside us. We only need courage to see it. One elder stepped closer, his eyes meeting Kalira's. Perhaps we have forgotten what it means to see ourselves clearly. Perhaps it is time to remember. With that, the elders invited Kalira and Ethan to speak to the entire city. News spread quickly, and by the evening, Virelians gathered in the main square. The square was filled with shimmering lights floating like stars brought to the ground. Kalira stood at the center, her presence commanding yet gentle. Ethan watched as the crowd focused on her, their faces cautious but open. Kalira spoke, her voice carrying across the square. We have been taught to believe we are flawed. We have hidden our faces, our voices, our hearts, but we are more than the lies we were told. Each of us carries light, courage, and wisdom. We are worthy of being seen, of being loved, of being proud of who we are. A hush fell over the crowd. Some Virelians shifted nervously, unsure how to react. Then a young child stepped forward holding a small glowing crystal and placed it at Kalira's feet. Others followed, leaving small gifts, drawings, and tokens. It was a gesture of trust, of acknowledgement, of hope. Ethan saw the change ripple through the city. The Virelians began to speak to each other openly, heads lifted, eyes meeting without fear. Smiles appeared, first tentative, then more confident. Music rose from hidden corners, soft melodies that had been silent for centuries. The city, once shadowed by fear, now glowed with life, energy, and pride. Kalira turned to Ethan, her eyes reflecting the twin moons above. Your presence, your words, they have helped my people remember who we are. Ethan shook his head gently. You did the work. I only reminded you. You gave them permission to see themselves as they truly are. Kalira smiled, the first full smile Ethan had seen on her face. It was radiant, not because of her appearance, but because it came from truth, acceptance, and courage. As the night deepened, lights floating across the square mirrored the stars above. The city felt alive, not just in sound, but in spirit. Virelians moved freely, unburdened, their heads held high, their eyes bright. For the first time in generations, they saw themselves as whole, strong, and worthy. Ethan stood beside Kalira, watching the transformation with quiet satisfaction. Humanity's greatest gift, he thought, was not conquest or power, but understanding. It was the ability to see the value in another being, to remind them of what they already carried inside. Kalira's voice broke his thoughts. This is only the beginning, she said softly. But it feels like a new world has started. Ethan nodded. It has, and it will continue, as long as your people choose to see themselves as they truly are. For the first time in centuries, Virelia was awake, its people no longer hiding in shadows, but stepping into the light of their own worth. The change had begun and nothing could stop it. Months had passed since Ethan had first arrived on Virelia. The city, once heavy with silence and fear, now thrummed with life. Crystal towers reflected soft light across streets filled with voices and laughter. Children ran freely, painting glowing murals in the squares while adults began to speak openly, sharing stories that had long been hidden. Kalira moved through her city with a calm confidence, no longer shrinking from her own reflection or from the eyes of her people. She had become a symbol of hope, courage, and the possibility of change. Ethan knew his mission was nearing its end. Humanity had come to Virelia not just to explore but to connect. And in this strange, distant world, they had helped awaken something deeper than politics or trade. A recognition of worth, a rediscovery of pride in one's own being. Kalira had led her people toward that awakening, and now it was time for him to leave. Early one morning, before the twin moons disappeared from the sky, Kalira met him at the edge of the city, where soft mist rolled over silver plains. Her face was calm, yet a subtle emotion shimmered in her violet eyes. You are leaving, she said softly, almost as if testing the truth of the statement. Yes, Ethan replied. My work here is done, but what you have begun, that will continue. Kalira turned to face him fully, a faint smile touching her lips. It is strange, she said. I once asked a question I thought no one could answer. I asked why I was ugly. Your answer, it made me cry, and now it has made me see my world in a new way. Ethan nodded. You carried the question far longer than I ever could have imagined, and you found the answer within yourself too. Her gaze drifted toward the city. Virelians walked through streets with faces open and heads high. Music floated from the squares, laughter echoed across the towers, and light reflected off the crystal buildings in colors that had long been unseen. "It isn't beautiful," she whispered. "I never thought we could feel so alive." Ethan took a deep breath, looking out across the city as well. "Your people have been living under shadows for centuries. You have given them permission to step into the light. That is more than any envoy could hope to do." Kalira's eyes softened. "It is not your gift alone. It was your belief, your words, and my courage to listen. That combination changed everything." For a long moment they stood in silence, feeling the weight of what had been accomplished. The mist swirled around them, catching the soft light of dawn and painting the plains with a gentle glow. It was as if the world itself was acknowledging the shift, the rebirth of a people who had forgotten their own strength. "I want to thank you," Kalira said finally, "for seeing me, for believing in me, for giving my people the chance to see themselves again." Her voice trembled, though her expression was steady. "Your words, they made me live in a way I never knew I could." Ethan smiled, his gaze steady and warm. "You made them see themselves. You made them brave. I only reminded you of what you already carried." Kalira reached out, brushing a hand lightly against his arm. "Then perhaps your presence will stay with us even when you leave." Ethan nodded. "It will, and you will carry it further. This is only the beginning for your people. What has started here will ripple outward, through generations, through worlds. You have begun a change that cannot be stopped." She looked down at her hands, then back up at him, her eyes glistening. "I have learned that beauty is not what others say it is," she said. "It is courage, kindness, and the willingness to see yourself clearly. Your answer, it made me cry that day, but it also made me live." Ethan placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "And now your world is alive because of it." Kalira stepped back, letting him move toward the landing craft. She turned one last time to look at the city behind her. It was no longer a place of fear, of shadows and hiding. It was bright, open, full of life and full of hope. She smiled to herself, finally seeing her reflection in the crystal towers, not with shame, but with acceptance and pride. As Ethan boarded the craft, Kalira called out softly, "Farewell, friend, and thank you." Ethan waved, a quiet smile on his face. "Farewell, Kalira. Keep your people strong. Keep your hearts open, and never forget what you are worth." The craft lifted from the silver plains, rising above the glowing city, above the mist, and toward the stars. Kalira watched until it was a small speck in the sky, feeling a calm certainty in her heart. The tear she had once shed in sorrow was gone, replaced by something deeper, a tear of understanding, of awakening, and of hope. For the first time in centuries, Virelia was free. Its people had begun to see themselves as they truly were, strong, brave, and beautiful in every way that mattered. And somewhere above the silver plains, the twin moons shone down on a world ready to embrace its own light, forever changed by a human who reminded an alien woman of the truth she had always carried within. Kalira turned back toward the city, her steps confident, her head high. She smiled at the streets, at the glowing towers, at the faces of her people, and as she walked among them, she whispered softly to herself a promise and a truth. "We are worthy. We are seen, and we will never forget."